everyone, and welcome back to Noxcast, an Equinox news recap podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte King. I'm the managing executive editor of the Equinox.
And I'm Nathan Hope. I'm the administrative executive editor of the Equinox.
And it's our first week back from break, and as always, we've put out a paper. So no frills, no announcements, no nothing. Let's just get into it. We're going to lead today by talking about our editorial this week. We had a big one, as occasionally comes around, but it's not always so, I guess, directly related to us. This week's editorial focused on a resolution that was passed by Student Assembly, part of student government, at the beginning of this month that limits the amount of stipend allocations for any given student org to no more than $4,000 or the equivalent of 4 Class B stipends. So there's 4 different classes that correspond to different amounts per person, and Class B is 1,000. So 4,000 in total per year. This is something that's been kind of difficult for us to grapple with. We've had a lot of long and hard conversations about it. But, we're pretty big as far as student orgs go, and maybe more notably, we are one of 4 student orgs that receive stipends. It's included as part of our annual budget. I know that, recently the shift was made that all student orgs now submit an annual budget. We've been doing that for as long as any of us are aware. We have a lot of additional costs associated with running a weekly paper. There are things like print costs and supplies and just fundamentals of our organization that wouldn't have ever really worked under the prior model of just submitting a form every time you need something. I know that for maybe other orgs that aren't as reliant on like certain supplies and stuff like that, maybe that worked for them in the past. But in any case, we're all in the same boat now in terms of submitting budget requests. And so that's sort of the other piece of this, is that recently the deadline for budget request submissions for this coming year came around. So we did submit a budget request. And Nate, I'll let you talk a little bit about that since you're more on the business side of things.
Yeah. After all the conversations that we had, we decided that it really isn't an option for us to cut our stipend positions down to fit with this policy. We kept with precedent, and we kept the same amount of allocation we've given for at least 12 years and more than that. But since our last constitution, all of the stipends and position, all those things were the same. So we are allocating $13,750, which is overall, if you combine and add up everybody's stipends that they receive, that's how much it is. We don't think it's that much of an ask, considering precedent, considering consistency of these classes are correlative generally to the position's workload. And the thing about student orgs that receive stipends is they're more akin to a job than just a club. And it's not just us. It's, WKNH student-run radio station. You got Film Society, who runs, the Putnam Theater on a weekly basis. And then you have the Social Activities Council, which hosts events on a bi-weekly basis and provide a lot of value to the community in that way. These things take a lot of time every week, 20 hours, 30 hours, 40 hours, depending on the position that you're looking at. And so we think it's wholly unfair, and we think it's really devaluing to pass a policy like this. And I think when you're looking at the space of where higher ed is at right now, it's been no secret. We've talked about it on Noxcast, all the difficulties that are facing the college and the university system, higher ed in general. We're very familiar with that. But I will say, as it pertains to this is money that we've always asked for. We never asked for an additional amount from anyone. We're fine with what we get. And so we're pulling from the student activity fee pool, which every student organization pulls from. But we're using that money for a purpose, and it's to make sure that people can feel comfortable in their job, at least somewhat, with the amount of time that they put in, and then also, want to stay in that position or possibly move up to a higher a higher position. I can speak for myself a little bit as a co-lead of the organization. I only have basically 2 nights a week free. I have a part-time off-campus job. So Mondays and Tuesdays, I'm basically working on Equinox related things all those days, the entirety of the day. And Wednesday, I'm free generally, but still working on things often, whether it be emailing people, interviewing, reporting, editing, etc. Thursdays, same deal. And then Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, I'm working at my part-time job. And I receive a Class A stipend, which is the highest that it goes, and that's $12.50 a year. Might not seem like a lot compared to the amount of work I put in, but I've also been fine with that. I like doing what I do. I like putting out the news on a weekly basis. I like talking to people about it. I like seeing what everybody does. It makes me really proud. But I can't lie and say that money doesn't help me with feeling all right in my position, feeling like, I have something to fall back on, not just the 200 or so I make per week at my part-time job. And I can't really afford to work more hours there. I can't also work on Wednesday and Thursday because then I'd have no free nights a week. So from my personal experience, it's really valuable to have that stipend. And during our editorial discussion, I think it was no secret that I'm not the only one who is in that position. There's people who said, I used this to pay for a month or two of rent. I was looking forward to paying rent with it. I, use it for gas money, etc. And so I think you really have to look at what this policy does in terms of detriments to the campus. And we are going to try our hardest to fight, not just on behalf of us, but on behalf of all the student orgs with paid stipend positions. You guys fully deserve every cent that you get and that you have gotten for years. I know it's a hard job. I know from my position how hard my job can be. And I've not been on the e-board of Film Society, WKNH, or SAC, but I can see from the outside looking in how much of a time sink it is. And I understand that you guys are passionate and love what you do. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that it's okay for you to be devalued, I think is what I would want to say. And it's just really hard. And I got a little bit emotional during editorial too. It's such a hard discussion because what the policy sort of aims to do, if we were to have complied with it, is we, you, Charlotte, and me have to look essentially the other editors in the eyes and say, your position is no longer worth the small amount of money that you already are being given, and then pick and choose from there who should get less money and then who should get no money. And that's a position that no leader of an organization should have to be put in. And it's a position that we were put in against our will. And I think it's just something that we have to keep fighting about. This is only the start of what we're trying to do to fight back against this, is what I'll say.
Yeah, I'll just add, it's a position that we were put in against our will and has been very difficult to grapple with the idea of it. But it's also a position that we were put in without any prior notice or ability to be made aware before it was happening. Our first encounter with the fact that this was supposedly going to be our new reality was being notified that the resolution had passed, already been voted on, already brought into action, and so I think that also was a really difficult part of this situation is feeling left out of a conversation that so directly concerns us. And once again, that's not just the Equinox. That applies to all 4 organizations that are affected by this. We didn't know. There are some organizations that didn't even know up until the point that we spoke with them about it. And I feel that that's improper. I think that is a big part of the problem with this, because certainly if we had had the opportunity to be a part of that conversation and offer input, this could have occurred as a conversation between us and, between the organizations that are impacted and student assembly or student gov as a whole, whichever. And we could have expressed the stance in this editorial, directly in a conversation, and hopefully, avoided having to be thrust into this position at all. But certainly now that we're here, like Nate said, and I'll reiterate, we just aim to do whatever we can to make this right and to restore the proper, recognition of the value of the work that all these students in all of these orgs are doing, contributing to the public good of the campus and contributing really to the overall involvement of the community. Another point that we hit on in the editorial is, these organizations, they do so much work. We do so much work, and that reflects well on the college. Mm-hmm. We are some of the greatest assets that the college has in our current iterations. And so to kind of to kneecap our ability to continue our recruitment of new members and new officers, to continue to make it just that much more difficult to keep this ship sailing, it's really, I don't think it's proper. I don't think it's right. And I will do whatever we can to get back on course.
Yeah. If you've read the newspaper, listened to Noxcast any of the past weeks of this whole academic year, or even previous to that, that our editorial, typically we're saying this area of the college is where they could be doing better on this front, and et cetera, et cetera. But I have to say, when it comes to Keene State and a small public liberal arts college in New Hampshire of all states, we do very well in terms of having opportunities for students in these spaces. I mean, I think it's unheard of to have a college of this size have such a strong student media presence with the news, with radio, and with film. I mean, that's part of, the tour given an orientation. You look at the Putnam, wow, there's a student-run movie theater. They have movies every weekend. They have like a whole club where you can, bring in movies and choose what you want. And there's a community there. And you look at, you can have your own radio station. You could become a published author, a published photographer. You can win awards up to, the national level in journalism. It's not any small piece, and it's a public relations benefit to the college, which is, I think, unmatched by few things that they offer otherwise. Because really the student-run aspects of this campus are some of the biggest draws, because that's where you find your community. And it's certainly valuable, all the events that are put on by academic departments and other departments on campus. But I think that there's something special and there's something unique about what these organizations offer for those just coming in. I think any general member of any of the organizations would testify as to how much it's been helpful to them to have the opportunity to meet new people, to sort of network in that way. And so I think looking towards stipends as, seemingly like the first way of cutting costs in the area of student activity fee dollars is really disappointing in that way as well. And then I will also add, when it comes to the Equinox, other organizations that are new, that are coming up, that are trying to be revived, that people are really trying to take the initiative to get students involved, they look to us to highlight them, to feature the fact that they're doing good work on campus, to feature the fact that they're putting so much time and effort into something that they care about and that they want people to get involved with. They look to us for to be featured, to have sort of that voice, because we are the student voice and we're trying to lift everyone up, and we're trying to, and in that way it kind of promotes the college's mission, because we care about student involvement. It's no secret. We care about, civic engagement, political participation. We care about all these things. So from our perspective, I think, we do everything in our power to lift up other organizations. That's why we held Media Org Madness, was because we wanted there to be a space where people could look at what the campus has to offer, for students interested in these spaces. So yeah, again, we're going to do everything in our power to fight against it. And it's not just about us, but I think that's what I would have to say about when it comes to us and when it comes to the PR benefits that we all give to the college.
Yeah. All right. Moving on from that now, I think we can loop around and move to our top story in news this week. This is a piece that I worked on, which covered the most recent, it was the March meeting of the KSC Senate, which had a few different notable elements, but I think definitely sort of the focus, the big news item was the approval of the revised bylaws of the Senate, so the bylaws that govern the body, and particularly the revision that amended who is able to serve in chair positions, whether that's the chair of the Senate or a chair of any of the committees within the Senate, and the fact that going forward, now that these revised bylaws have been approved, the only people who can serve in those chair positions are tenured full-time faculty, which is a pretty big change from the way things have been done in the past. The Senate is made up of, yes, full-time faculty, but also adjunct faculty, staff members, and students. There are 4 students serving on the Senate currently. And so I think it kind of lends to, a larger conversation about the inclusion of students and staff and adjunct faculty, but for us as the student voice of this campus, we really kind of focused in on the student angle, the inclusion of students in, topics and the ability to contribute meaningfully to conversations that directly concern every member of the campus community, and certainly that includes students. And it's the kind of thing I on one hand, I commend the fact that the Senate has a student presence, and certainly a student presence that is you don't always find that on a college Senate. Sometimes colleges will even have exclusively a faculty Senate. So I do think that, the starting point that we're working from is better than you'd find in some places. But I also, I don't know. I think that certainly there's a reason why this is a controversial topic.
Yeah, definitely sort of a departure in that, the previous Senate meeting that I attended, they had talked about how in the past they've had staff members and adjunct faculty chair committees successfully, but the justification for the move being that with tenured full-time faculty, there's a certain level of job protection, so there wouldn't be, I guess, an instance of retaliation from the college against a particular chair based on the work that they would aim to do. I think personally that I think I probably wouldn't have voted for the bylaws if I was on the Senate, because I think any way that we can have that increased or elevated level of student voice, even up to the chair level of the Senate, I think is valuable. And I think there are students who are engaged enough and care enough about the college who maybe would be even more willing to join the Senate if that was an opportunity that they had to do. But as it stands now, it's kind of making it just a little bit harder. And obviously, there's plenty of tenured full-time faculty that could accurately speak to the concerns of students, that could speak to the concerns of staff and adjuncts. But it's sort of just the difference between it coming from the particular group affected themselves versus coming secondhand from a tenured full-time faculty member that might not have that same level of direct experience with issues that particularly concern those groups in general. So, it was a really tricky thing. And I think the Senate meetings that I've attended, basically every motion that is brought up is almost always passed like unanimously. So it was interesting to me to see a vote that actually had some level of contention. And it with the threshold that it had to pass, it also was quite close as well. So I don't think it's the end of the discussion permanently, is what I'll say. I think it's a discussion worth having in coming years about just depending on how things pan out. If that might be something that they would want to revisit. But yeah.
Yeah, I do think just to speak a little more to the point that you made about how, certainly there are some faculty who can, represent the viewpoints that, may be echoed by other members. I did think it was interesting that one of the senators, Professor Nick Germana, who's also the chair of the curriculum committee, he talked during the discussion at the meeting about his prior experience when he was a student here, and also served on the Senate as a student senator. And I don't know, I thought that was an interesting just background to present, the fact that he, as he said, kind of can see both sides of that issue and the two perspectives that lends. And so I think you're right as well that this discussion is definitely far from over. But we had one of our staff writers, Tammy, wrote an opinion piece about this, talking again about sort of the fact that, there have been chairs in the past who were not full-time faculty, and it seems like the place is still standing. So she took the stance of disagreeing with the that particular bylaw revision. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it plays out and what the future holds with this sort of restructuring. All right, I think from there we can move into our top story from region and state. There were a lot of articles coming through this week, once again, of just how various aspects of life are being impacted by federal budget cuts that are coming down from Trump's administration. This one in particular focused on how food pantries across the state are being impacted and kind of starting to feel the burn a little bit of just the political unrest and difficulty. I think it's a testament to the dedication of volunteers in these spaces, that they're just trying to keep on keeping on. But it's scary to think about, where that puts us if we end up living in a state that can't sustain food for people, because we're already it's so difficult to get resources to the people who need them, and the idea of some of the most like convenient and just present resources in a community shutting down it's difficult to think of that.
Yeah, I think with all these recent stories about cuts, it's sort of like a boat that's sinking, and you're like patch up one thing and then, now there's another thing you have to patch up. And because it's just every different aspect of sort of government programs and funding has been either looked at for cuts or already cut, or it's next. And that's the hard part is, recently in the New Hampshire legislature, they floated, for instance, defunding the state library. And then there was so much pushback to that they said, oh, well, now we can't defund the state library, so now we'll try to defund this thing. And the problem is that with how we already fund things in the state of New Hampshire, which is quite low compared to neighboring states, it's not really feasible to cut things even more so than they already are, because there are already so many organizations, so many different services that are operating at a level that is lower than that of their comparable peers in the New England region. And I know when it comes to the food pantry issue that, I know some of the people that are in charge of, for instance, Feeding Tiny Tummies, which is one of the local nonprofit organizations in the Monadnock region that offers these services, particularly focusing on childhood food insecurity. But they've told me how hard it can be to get some of these grants and to get some of that funding to keep that going. They've also told me that it's far from just kids who go to their facility and need food. The issue is always too much demand, not enough supply. It's never the other way around. And then I also look at other organizations like Keene Mutual Aid, which does similar work, and they do great things. But it's sort of like the first thing that you think of when you think of charity a lot of the times, and you think of nonprofits, you think of groups that give away food to those in need, because as one of the things you need to live and survive, it's important that people have that. And some would argue it's a human right, but I think, it's definitely anyone pushing for cuts against programs like this is sort of just needless cruelty for sure. I mean, all we can do right now is, as we've said previously on Noxcast, to contact your representatives, to go to protests, to make your voice heard, because, clearly they are susceptible to backlash given the recent New Hampshire State Library story. So keep the pressure on. The fight is never over on any of these fronts, and the legislators have to know that people don't find this acceptable.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to add to that. You hit on the moral. We should have like a thing whenever the moral comes up.
Right.
But yeah, if this is something that you're seeing and looking at the potential future impacts, and that's not the New Hampshire that you want to live in, talk to people who are involved. Talk to people who have the power to fix things, and get involved. I think that can go ahead and bring us to our student life top story. I thought this was a really nice story idea, coming from our staff writer, Xander, talking to some of the Muslim students on campus and their experience with celebrating Ramadan, which I think on the day that we post this, Ramadan will be ending the next day. And, it's something that can be difficult, as we learned from the article, to be away from home and not feeling that kind of shared experience of fasting, and feeling kind of alone. And so I thought this was some really just nice insight into that experience. And also, we always like whenever we get the chance to shed light on the experiences of people who have, who celebrate holidays from a variety of cultures, and sort of, celebrate the diversity of experience on this campus. And so I thought it came out very well, and I was very interested to hear the perspectives.
Yeah, I think it sort of really captured like the student experience aspect of that, but it's hard sort of feeling somewhat alone in that, given sort of the lack of a very large Muslim community on campus. But I think it was sort of heartwarming for me to see that through the Global Cultural Club that they have that support of their peers, and that they can feel that they're seen through that. I think it's really important. And I think, Ramadan is just such a prominent religious holiday that it's important to think about how we can best support these students. And I think a lot of people are doing the best that they can to uplift those who are observing. And yeah, just a really solid story. Our staff writer Xander has been putting out some good stuff from the start already. So I'm excited to see more of his work.
Definitely. And yeah, I thought that was really sweet. And for folks who are like involved in that club but don't celebrate Ramadan, like I thought that was cool. The opportunity to like learn from somebody who is practicing that and kind of just I don't know, get more insight into what that experience is like. But definitely, I would encourage anybody, if you have Muslim friends or just know people in the community, to support them as we are sort of reaching the close of that holiday. And yeah, definitely shout out to Xander putting out some good stuff recently. So, all right, let's move into our arts and entertainment top story. We were saying it can be tough sometimes to, we have the break period that sort of divides up the period of time between when we can start working on stories to go in this post-break paper versus when we actually get to publish it. And so something like event coverage can be, we try to have a variety because event coverage is very timely, one of our news values. And, at this point, this event is a little old, but we thought that it just kind of fit because it's a cool event and it seemed like there was a nice variety of performance. I know a lot of people did music stuff, but I think there was also some comedy and some other, a variety of acts. And this was a collaboration between the Art Collective and the class of 2026. And so it is, it's always nice to see student orgs kind of coming together to put something together that just sort of lifts up people in the community and gives them the opportunity to show off their talents.
Yeah, I was happy to see that they had a pretty big turnout with that. I know it's difficult and know to anticipate when planning an event from recent experience. So props to them on that front and getting people to actually come out to this thing. And also, I think is really interesting when you look at and they mentioned this in the article, but when you look at the class of 2026 board, they are all sort of in the STEM fields, and they were sort of talking about how they wanted to find a way to branch out and make connections in the art spaces. So I feel like this was a really creative way of doing that, partnering up with the Art Collective, but not just doing, art thing, but like, holding an open mic night, which is more of sort of just like a general art spaces thing. It was at the Thorn, but also, there's, comedy and music and sort of that performance aspect of it. It's really cool to see. And it sort of reminds me of an article that I did before about the intersection between STEM and the arts. And it sort of used to be called, STEAM, because those two can go together in a lot of instances. You can't really have one without the other. There's so much room for art in STEM fields. So I thought that was a really, interesting way of sort of reaching out and trying to find a way to bridge a gap of representation. So yeah, cool stuff.
Definitely. I love some interdisciplinary collaboration. And, I always think it's cool to, open an event up because like they could have done something that was very just focused on like the artistic angle. And I think that's cool too. But, being able to just open it up to the community and say anybody who has something they want to offer to this open mic, come by and the stage is yours basically. I just think that's a cool way to engage people across a lot of different spaces on campus and create the opportunity for them to connect and just foster a greater sense of community. I think with that, we can end it off with our sports top story, which covers KSC softball and their trip down to Florida. This This is something they do every year to get their season started over spring break. But I think it's a cool experience, and there was some interesting like insight from the head coach talking about how different it is from like playing here in New Hampshire, because you go down to this whole other state, and you're kind of in this headspace where like it's really just it's you and your team. You don't necessarily like know anybody else or have like an immediate community there, which admittedly sounds a little scary, but I think I can see how that lends to just a stronger team dynamic, and really relying on each other to keep it together and just go for the win.
Yeah, and then they ended up doing better in this trip than last year. They had 6 wins and 4 losses. So props to them on improving, and I definitely think it's a big bonding experience to sort of have that unique experience of going down, and that's all you got is each other. And another interesting thing about softball is it's their first season with their new coach. So sort of a change of leadership there, and sort of seeing how things pan out with their season. I'd be really curious to keep on watching them, and obviously we're always gonna root for the Owls here on Noxcast as well, because obvious reasons. So go team.
Yeah, definitely a space to watch. As they kind of start strong, and like you mentioned, start out this season with a new coach at the helm. So yeah, definitely go Owls, and we'll be excited to maybe do some future reporting. And also shout out as always to actually our new senior reporter, Elias. So congrats on that, but shout out to him as always for some really strong coverage. That wraps up another episode of Noxcast. As always, thank you so much for watching or listening. As always, I'd like to extend very special thanks to the composer of the music for Noxcast, our very own Equinox alum, Zach Keenan, as well as the designer of the graphic for Noxcast, our very own art director, Elijah Fisher, and of course the editor of Noxcast, our very own multimedia director, Jakob Hall. We will be back next week for another news recap here on Noxcast. Until then, I've been Charlotte King.
And I've been Nathan Hope. Thank you for tuning in.